Palestinians call it a new catastrophe, the relocation of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Thousands of Palestinians have been protesting at the Gaza-Israel border. So, what will this mean for one of the world's longest conflicts? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. U.S. President Donald Trump announced he was recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in December. Now, the United States has relocated its embassy from Tel Aviv to a contested area in Jerusalem. Trump's daughter Ivanka attended the opening ceremony on Monday with her husband, Jared Kushner. The move has drawn international condemnation, and tens of thousands of Palestinians gathered at the Gaza-Israel border to protest. Dozens of them were shot dead by Israeli troops. Katia Lopez-Hodoyan reports.
Rage on a day Palestinians have been dreading. Moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem has been condemned around the world since it was announced in December. Palestinians have been protesting in the thousands near Gaza's border with Israel.
We're here at the eastern border with Gaza. The occupation will transfer the U.S. Embassy to occupy Jerusalem. They say it's the capital of Israel, but Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, not Israel.
But this isn't just about the embassy. It's the culmination of decades of grievances. The blockade that has made life in Gaza unbearable, and the Palestinians' demands to return to the homes they were forced out of so many years ago. In the West Bank, more signs of anger, with protests in Bethlehem. And a similar scene in Ramallah, with rallies opposing the embassy move to a city that is claimed as a capital by both Palestinians and Israelis. Many governments have criticized the decision. They believe it will worsen tensions between Israel and Palestine. Turkey's president says the U.S. has now forfeited its mediator role in the Middle East.
The United States has chosen to be part of the problem rather than the solution with its latest step, and has lost its mediating role in the peace process.
For generations, U.S. presidents have signed a waiver to delay moving the American embassy. Israel says it's waited long enough.
President Trump is moving the embassy because it's a national security priority to have the embassy here in Jerusalem.
The pictures tell the story of deep divisions, the two different versions of reality. Cheers of victory in West Jerusalem, along with a sense of high security and control. In Gaza and the occupied territories, further chaos and outrage. Katia Lopez-Hodoyan, Al Jazeera.
Jerusalem is at the core of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and its status remains disputed. So why is the city so contentious? Well, it holds some of the holiest sites for the world's three major religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Many Israelis consider it their eternal and undivided capital, while Palestinians want East Jerusalem to be the capital of their future state. After Israel declared itself a state in 1948, West Jerusalem came under its control, while Jordan took control of East Jerusalem. But in 1967, Israel captured East Jerusalem, including the Old City, and later annexed it, a move that was never recognized by the international community. Many initiatives have endorsed the so-called two-state solution over the years, Israel and Palestine existing side by side and possibly sharing Jerusalem as their capital, but those talks have long stalled. All right, let's now get the thoughts of our guests. Joining us from Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, he's the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. In Jerusalem, Elhanan Miller, a Palestinian politics researcher at the Forum for Regional Thinking. That's an Israeli research center. And here in Doha, Mohammed Cherkaoui, Professor of Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. A warm welcome to you all. Mr. Cherkaoui, I want to start with you first. Jerusalem, of course, was meant to be a final status issue. By recognizing Jerusalem as the capital issue, has the U.S. essentially created a fait accompli on the ground there?
No. Normally, from a conflict transformation perspective, you need to tackle the deep-rooted causes of the conflict. And for the last 20-plus years, the status of Jerusalem has been very crucial in the entire process of the peace process, either by the United States, by the United Nations, as well as the European Union. So what we have seen today is creating a mess or adding to the complexity of the conflict itself by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, while Trump has not left any way to maneuver or to redesign another alternative to the dying peace process. So definitely the final status of Jerusalem remains very significant in the eyes of the Palestinians, the Arabs, and other supporters. Then there is no way that Trump can say, well, we take Jerusalem off the table, and then you Israelis and Palestinians can come together to the negotiating table. So basically, it is a main spoiler of any process of conflict transformation, let alone conflict resolution.
Mustafa Barghouti, the deaths and injuries in Gaza today, certainly a stark juxtaposition to what's going on in Jerusalem with the opening of the U.S. Embassy. So I want to get your opinion as far as if this really shows how tensions are rising right now.
Well, this is a very mild way of describing the situation. It's not tensions, it's massacres. Israeli army is committing a massacre now against the Palestinian civilian peaceful protesters. The Israeli army is using live ammunitions, lethal weapons. They're even using tanks and using airplanes to bombard people who are peacefully demonstrating. This is unacceptable. So far, 41 people have been killed, which is a larger number maybe than all those killed during the last 5 weeks. And no less than 2,000 injuries, including about 800 with live ammunitions. This is a barbaric reaction. This is a massacre that should not be allowed. What the United States did by moving its embassy is not to change the reality on the ground, but rather change the position of the United States. They simply made the United States complicit and participant in a war crime, which is annexing land by force and supporting Israel in its annexation of East Jerusalem, which is totally unacceptable and will not be allowed. And we Palestinians will never accept that. Let me remind you that Jerusalem is not the Jewish capital as they claim, as Netanyahu claims. Jerusalem was established 1,000 years before any Jewish person stepped into this land. And if it was related to Jewish population, it was for very short periods of time. But there is nobody in the world that can give Israel the monopoly over Jerusalem. Jerusalem should also be the capital of the Palestinian people. Jerusalem and the old city belongs to the Palestinians, whether they are Muslims or Christians, and no occupation in the world can change this fact.
Elhanan Miller, can I get your reaction to what Mustafa Barghouti was saying there? And also, what is the concern level right now that things are only going to get worse?
Well, I think every life that is taken today is a very tragic event. I'm not here to defend the loss of life. I do think, though, that the Palestinian leadership, and particularly Hamas, should ask itself, in view of the high death toll, why it's funding and paying money to families and to people to go to the fence, which is an international border, and lose their lives on the fence, with the pretext of return, which is, in the words of Ismail Haniyeh, supplanting Israel and causing Israel a new Nakba, or a new catastrophe. So with that pretext in mind, I think, of course, the soldiers bear responsibility for the open fire laws, but also Hamas and the Palestinians who go to the fence despite clear instructions from the Israeli army to stay away from that area also bear a certain amount of responsibility. With regards to Jerusalem, I would just say, I don't want to go into the history lesson of who owns Jerusalem. I think that's not the relevant question right now. The question is, how can Israelis and Palestinians share Jerusalem, return to the negotiating table, and talk about a fair and equitable deal? I do think that this American decision makes it harder for them to do that. I think Israelis are all proud and happy that the United States is recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. But I think we should also be very cognizant of the effect that this has on the Palestinian leadership, especially the moderate leadership of Mahmoud Abbas, and the credibility of the Americans as fair brokers.
Mustafa Barghouti, it looked to me like you had a reaction to what Elhanan Miller was saying there. Did you want to add something?
Of course. How can we speak about negotiating about Jerusalem when Israel is unilaterally annexing Jerusalem? and unilaterally declaring it as its capital. Whom will we negotiate with? With Netanyahu, who's saying it's a Jewish city forever and Palestinians have no right to it? With Naftali Bennett, who declares that Palestinians should not have the right to have their own state? Or with Shakid, who describes us as insects? What kind of government we can negotiate with? The reality is that the Israeli society and the Israeli governments are moving so fast in the direction of being racist. And what they have done is to transform the system of occupation into a system of apartheid, a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa at one point of time. And every Israeli should be ashamed of themselves. They should be ashamed of living in a place which is creating a system of apartheid. And if they really want peace, they should bring down this government and bring down this horrible system and regime that is allowing their soldiers to shoot people. By the way, the vast majority of Palestinians killed today and in the last 5 weeks in Gaza were shot and killed in the buffer zone, inside Gaza, not at the borders. Many of them are children. Many of them are journalists. Many of them are medical people who were trying to provide medical aid. I've just been to Kalandia and we were shot at by the Israeli soldiers inside Kalandia. At which borders we were standing? Just because we were peacefully demonstrating, they shoot us? In which country this is allowed? By which system this should be acceptable? This is nothing but savage behavior of a barbaric government that is practicing racism, practicing occupation, and practicing a violation of every international law.
Mohammed Cherkaoui, what options do the Palestinians have now when it comes to the peace process? Do they have any? Are they completely boxed in?
Well, first, let me mention one thing that is very significant. Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel represents an assumption based on zero-sum equation. Therefore, the Israelis now are celebrating this triumph as a political endeavor supported by the Trump administration. There is a blind side here, which means that if we can maintain status quo for a few weeks or few months, that doesn't mean the conflict has gone away. Therefore, there will be some reaction. There will be some movement of resistance against this act and also the use of force either along the border in Gaza or at Kalandia, and as mentioned earlier. Now, I think there are two issues here. One, how to counter such a political statement that Jerusalem now is the capital. It's a de facto reality that is thrown to the Palestinians. I would argue for two things. One, there is always another point of re-entry to the conflict by changing the discourse, changing the dynamics, and presenting a third way. I think now the Palestinians need to move away from moral politics, from the outcrying against this immoral act, and engage in a process where you can defy political realism by something that is not really there yet, but in a way that you figure out a formula, a political formula, either based on resistance or based on finding new supporters in Europe or in Russia or elsewhere who can come back to the issue that this is a conflict, this is not a situation of a fait accompli. In other words, we need new stakeholders coming from within Palestine, from outside Palestine, to figure out a rebuttal and also a formula of coming back to the conflict without drifting into violence. Therefore, I think what we are risking now is a possible combination of peaceful resistance that may drift away into acts of violence, and therefore I think neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis will be able to contain the real escalation.
Elhanan Miller, President Trump had said in the past that this embassy move would boost peace efforts. But ever since he made his decision public that the embassy would be moved, tensions have really been on the rise there. What do you think? Do you think peace efforts will get a boost ultimately from this, and how could that be?
No, I don't think that peace efforts will get a boost. I think that if anything, this harms peace efforts. I do think, though, that Dr. Barghouti and I agree on the outcome of what talks should produce, which is an equitable and fair two-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians. What Dr. Barghouti neglected to mention, however, is the fact that for the last 11 years, the Palestinian leadership is divided between two territories and two strategies, namely Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Those two strategies are on the part of Hamas, destroying Israel and supplanting it with an Arab state, and on the side of Mahmoud Abbas, a negotiation with Israel and a two-state solution. As long as that's the situation and it hasn't been resolved among the Palestinians, then there's no wonder that Israelis are voting for more right-wing governments and eschewing negotiations, because if they can only achieve half a peace, then in fact that's no peace at all. So I think Dr. Barghouti must also understand the difficult position that Israeli voters are in, given the Palestinian divide and their inability to resolve that divide after all these years.
Dr. Barghouti, putting the peace process, or the moribund peace process, on the side for a moment, has the U.S. Embassy move actually changed things significantly on the ground for Palestinians?
It changed no facts. It will not affect our determination to get our freedom and to get our free state and to get Jerusalem as our capital. But let me respond here to what your Israeli colleague spoke about. I know he tries to look like a dove, but I think what he's saying is totally misleading. There has been no solution, not because there is a difference between Hamas and Fatah. For a long time, PLO was representing Palestinians, and it signed the peace agreement, which is called Oslo Agreement. Who killed Oslo Agreement? Netanyahu. Who assassinated Yitzhak Rabin? An Israeli extremist provoked by Netanyahu. Who was blocking the possibility of negotiations? Israel. Yes, we had two different strategies, that's true. But today one strategy has failed completely. Oslo has failed, negotiations have failed, and I think Hamas wanted military resistance. Today we are unified. Palestinians, all Palestinians, Hamas, Fatah, Mubadara, are adopting what we've been advocating for 16 years. Popular, non-violent resistance as a strategy to change the balance of power between us and Israel, since negotiations are not working. And let me say that this is not a conflict. A conflict is a dispute between two sides that are disputing over a piece of land or an issue. No, this is one side occupying the other. Israel occupying the Palestinians, Israel oppressing the Palestinians, Israel practicing settlements, colonies against Palestinians, Israel having an apartheid regime that is directed against Palestinians. This cannot be resolved without ending apartheid, without ending occupation, without ending the system of oppression. We know it will take a lot of struggle, and we know we should work very hard to be unified, and we will do that, but we will not give up. And this act from the American president will not change in a bit our determination to continue our struggle to be free and to have justice.
Elhanan Miller, you heard Mustafa Barghouti there say your previous claims were a bit misleading. Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I think it's very difficult for Israelis on the left, which I consider myself part of, to convince people to vote for left-wing parties when moderate Palestinians, and I believe Dr. Barghouti is a moderate Palestinian, say that violence and popular uprising is a strategy rather than a tactic. A strategy to what end? What is the end goal of this violence? Is it a two-state solution? Which I'm sure he advocates,
non-violent,
the Palestinian Authority advocates.
I said non-violent resistance. Don't mislead the... You're not saying the truth. I said non-violent resistance. I didn't say violent.
Mr. Barghouti,
why do you
I'll
call
come
it
back
violent?
to you in just a
said
second.
Then even
non-violent.
Mr. Barghouti, I'll come back to you in just a minute. If we could just have Mr. Elhanan Miller finish his point, go ahead.
The same applies to...
Yeah, please, but...
So the same applies to non-violent resistance. To what end are Israelis supposed to vote for? To what end are Israelis supposed to vote for left-wing parties and a resumption of negotiations when even these non-violent protests will lead to the supplanting of Israel as a state? When the goal of Hamas and the people who are entering or approaching the border is to return to communities that are no longer part of the Palestinian state and that will not be part of a Palestinian state in the future.
All right,
the Palestinians themselves have to decide what the end game is, and they have to do that through elections.
All right, Mustafa Barghouti, go ahead.
Well, let me say first of all, Hamas agreed with us not only on using nonviolent resistance, but also they agreed on the solution of two-state solution. They agreed on that. They agreed even to become part of the PLO and not to create an alternative body. But it is Israel that is preventing the establishment of a Palestinian state. It is Israel that is killing the possibility of two-state solution. If you want to vote, vote against the system of apartheid. And don't tell me that Labour Party is a left party. Labour Party is completely complicit with Netanyahu's policies. Labour Party supports the establishment of settlements in the occupied territories. It was the one who started settlements in the occupied territories. You cannot call for peace and support settlement activities. At the end of the day, by killing the two-state solution, you are pushing us back to the old demand we had before, which is one state with full democratic rights for both people, where we and you can live together in equality, with justice, where I will have the same rights as you do, where I can run to be your prime minister. If you want that, you're most welcome. You don't want two states and you don't want state. What do you want? You want us to accept a system of apartheid? Impossible. And you cannot keep blaming the victim for what you are doing. Israel has a nuclear power, it has a military power, it has a political power, and it is abusing all of that to prevent the establishment of peace in this place.
Mohammed Cherkaoui, the protests that have been going on in Gaza, is this the sign of a new movement? Do you think this movement will be sustained? And do you believe that this could actually affect the situation on the ground there in a positive way for Palestinians ultimately?
Well, in the case of this protracted conflict where you have no prospects of having the two main parties negotiate a certain deal, of course it is now up to the grassroots movement that is basically energizing the youngsters who have a strong attachment to their cause. They would like to live free, to be respected citizens, equal citizens like everybody else. So this is a movement that is going to stay with us and even may transform into a wider movement of self-liberation from a system that has been contested by the United Nations, by the Europeans, and by the way, 52 ambassadors to Israel decided not to attend the ceremonies here there in Jerusalem out of 82 invitations. So this is an indication that if we have right-wing politics in Washington as well in Tel Aviv that have come up with this formula of Jerusalem is only for Palestinians, only for Israelis, not for Palestinians, then we have an issue also with the discourse itself. In other words, I think that the Netanyahu-Trump-Pence alliance will run out of logic because of this imbalance of power that is not given any opportunity for the powerless to at least have a way of having some equal treatment. So in short, I think now we are going to go back to the very beginning, the doctrine of liberation movement. And I think if it maintains this momentum up, bottom up, then I think now Netanyahu will have an issue in the long run. And then we have also to remind ourselves that this is no longer a top-down way of controlling citizens. It's a bottom-up process where you have people, working networks through the internet and social media. So I think this is the beginning of a major contestation of political realism. Therefore, I think we need a new front from wise individuals, wise governments who need to look beyond this situation and say, well, guys, we can still maintain. And I think if the two-state solution is out of the discussion now, we need to go back to equal citizen, equal rights in a society or in a government that is for Israelis as well as for Palestinians. If not, I think the situation will explode, and then later on we will resort to violence.
All right. Well, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all our guests, Mustafa Barghouti, Elhanan Miller, and Mohammed Cherkaoui. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.